I want you to think back to the most important decision you ever made in your life. That one moment when everything changed. For me, it was sitting in my car completely broke, at the lowest point of my life. I had just enough gas to either drive to a job interview or back home to my apartment. In that moment, something extraordinary happened, not around me, but inside my mind. Up until then, I had been living like most people do, reacting to life, letting my thoughts run wild, making excuses, and blaming circumstances for my situation. But in that car, staring at the gas gauge, I realized something that would change everything. My life wasn't the result of my circumstances. It was the result of my thinking. Right now, in this room, each of you has a similar battle going on. Your mind is either working for you or against you. There is no middle ground. Every thought, every mental pattern, every belief is either moving you toward success or pushing you toward failure. In the next 24 hours, you'll have approximately 60,000 thoughts. Most of these thoughts are the same ones you had yesterday and the day before and the day before that. These mental patterns are literally creating your future moment by moment, day by day. I've spent decades studying the most successful people in the world. Do you know what sets them apart? It's not talent, it's not luck, it's not even education. The single biggest difference is their ability to control their minds rather than letting their minds control them. Look at the person sitting next to you. Both of you have the same basic mental equipment. You both have the same number of brain cells. You both have the same fundamental capacity for success. But I guarantee that one of you is letting your mind run on autopilot while the other is starting to realize the incredible power they have to direct their thinking. The greatest enemy you'll ever face isn't out there in the world. It's not the economy, your competition, or your circumstances. Your biggest enemy is that uncontrolled mental chatter that tells you you can't, it's too hard, you're not ready, or you don't deserve it. I know this enemy well. I've faced it myself, and I've helped thousands of others face it too. This invisible force holds more people back from success than all other obstacles combined. But here's the good news. Once you understand how to take control of your mind, everything changes. Your potential becomes limitless. Now, some of you might be thinking, my mind isn't really the problem. If I just had more money, better opportunities, or the right connections, stop right there. That thought itself is exactly what I'm talking about. That's your uncontrolled mind creating excuses, building barriers and keeping you exactly where you are. That's why understanding the nature of your mind is absolutely critical to your success. When I was sitting in that car that day, what changed wasn't the amount of gas in my tank. What changed was my understanding of how my mind was running my life. Your mind is the most sophisticated technology on planet Earth. It processes millions of bits of information every second. It solves complex problems while you sleep. It can visualize, create, and manifest extraordinary results. But here's what nobody tells you. This incredible power works both ways. It can create success just as easily as it can create failure. Water has no direction of its own. It simply flows where the path leads it. Your thoughts are exactly the same way. Left uncontrolled, they'll flow down the paths of least resistance toward worry, doubt, and fear. This is your brain's natural survival mechanism, always looking for what could go wrong. I remember working with a top executive, let's call him David. He was brilliant, hardworking, and had every advantage you could imagine. But he kept hitting an invisible ceiling in his career. During our first conversation, I asked him to pay attention to his internal dialogue for just 5 minutes. Know what he discovered. In those 5 minutes, he had 17 negative thoughts about himself and his abilities. 17! That's more than 3 negative thoughts per minute. This is the battlefield I'm talking about. Every minute of every day, your mind is either building you up or tearing you down. There's no neutral ground. When you wake up in the morning, that voice starts chattering. I didn't get enough sleep. I'm not ready for that presentation. What if I fail? Sound familiar? The average person has between 12,000 and 60,000 thoughts per day. Here's the shocking part. 95 of these thoughts are exactly the same as the day before. If those thoughts weren't serving you yesterday, they won't serve you today. You're literally recycling the mental garbage that's holding you back. Your mind is like a supercomputer, and your thoughts are the programs it runs. Most people are trying to succeed in life while running mental software from their past old beliefs, old fears, old limitations. It's like trying to run a modern business with technology from the 1980s. Mind. It can't tell the difference between what's real and what's vividly imagined. When you worry about something, your body produces the same stress chemicals as if that thing were actually happening. When you visualize success with emotion and clarity, your brain creates the same neural patterns as if you'd already achieved it. I saw this firsthand with a young entrepreneur in one of my seminars. She had incredible business ideas, but was paralyzed by fear of public speaking. Every time she thought about presenting to investors, her mind would flood her body with anxiety. Her thoughts were literally creating her physical reality. What you need to understand, your thoughts are not just passive observations of reality. They are active creators of your reality. Every thought you think is like a blueprint that your mind and body work to turn into reality. When you say, "I can't," you're literally programming your mental computer to find ways to make that true. The constant internal dialogue you carry around isn't just background noise. It's the operating system of your life. When that voice says, "That's not for people like me," or "I always mess things up," it's not just making observations. It's creating commands that your subconscious mind works to fulfill. You have thoughts running through your mind about what I'm saying. You're either thinking this makes sense and opening yourself to transformation, or you're thinking this is too simple and closing yourself off from what could be the most important message you've ever heard. The power of your thoughts over reality isn't just some feel-good idea. It's supported by decades of research in neuroscience and psychology. When you change your thinking, you literally change the physical structure of your brain. New neural pathways are formed. Old limiting patterns begin to fade. Your brain physically reorganizes itself to match your new way of thinking. This is why people can stay stuck for years, even decades, despite having every external advantage. Their uncontrolled minds keep running the same old programs, creating the same old results. But it's also why someone can transform their life almost overnight when they finally understand and apply this fundamental principle. The signs of an uncontrolled mind are all around us, and once you recognize them, they become impossible to ignore. Remember David, our executive? His uncontrolled mind was costing him in ways he never realized until we started peeling back the layers. One morning, he was scheduled to present a game-changing proposal to his board of directors. The night before, his mind started its familiar pattern. What if they don't like it? What if I mess up? What if someone asks a question I can't answer? By morning, he had convinced himself to water down his proposal, to play it safe. He literally talked himself out of his own brilliant ideas before anyone else had a chance to evaluate them. This is what an uncontrolled mind does. It creates elaborate stories about failure before you even try. It's like having a negative advisor working 24/7 inside your head, always finding reasons why you can't, shouldn't, or won't succeed. Look at your own life. How many times have you talked yourself out of opportunities? How many times has your mind created worst-case scenarios that never happened? Every time you catch yourself saying, "I'll do it tomorrow," or "I'm not ready yet," or "someone else would be better at this," you're witnessing your uncontrolled mind in action. I see it all the time. People who set goals in January and by February their own minds have convinced them to quit. They start a business, and at the first sign of challenge, their uncontrolled thoughts rush in with 1,000 reasons to give up. They meet someone special, and their mind immediately brings up every past relationship that didn't work out. The most dangerous part, these patterns become invisible to us. We start believing that this negative internal dialogue is actually protecting us, keeping us safe. But it's not protection, it's prison. An uncontrolled mind builds walls instead of bridges, creates obstacles instead of opportunities. The last time you had a great idea, what happened next? Did your mind immediately start listing all the reasons it wouldn't work? Did it remind you of past failures? Did it tell you to be realistic? That's not wisdom speaking. That's fear. That's your uncontrolled mind doing what it does best, keeping you firmly inside your comfort zone. I worked with a talented writer who had a book inside her for 20 years. Every time she sat down to write, her uncontrolled mind would flood her with comparisons. Look at all the great books already out there. Who are you to write a book? What if people hate it? 20 years of negative thought patterns kept her story locked inside. 20 years of lost opportunities because she couldn't control her mental chatter. The most painful part of an uncontrolled mind is that it makes you believe its stories are a reality. It tells you I'm not good with money and then creates behaviors that prove it right. It whispers you're not leadership material and then makes you act in ways that confirm that belief. These self-sabotaging behaviors aren't random. They're the direct result of unchecked mental patterns. When you procrastinate on important tasks, when you make excuses instead of taking action, when you choose short-term comfort over long-term growth, that's your uncontrolled mind running the show. Every time your mind wanders to worst-case scenarios during an important meeting, every time it replays past failures when you're about to try something new, every time it chooses fear over opportunity, you're paying the price of an uncontrolled mind. But here's what's crucial to understand. These patterns aren't your destiny. Just as your mind can be your greatest enemy, it can become your most powerful ally. The same mental power that has held you back can propel you forward with unstoppable force. The key is learning to recognize these signs not as permanent limitations, but as signals that it's time to take control. The price of an uncontrolled mind is staggering, and I've watched countless people pay it year after year without ever realizing what it's really costing them. That writer I mentioned, the price wasn't just a book that didn't get written. It was 20 years of living below her potential, 20 years of wondering what if, 20 years of dimming her own light. I've sat across from people in their 50s and 60s who look back with tears in their eyes, not because of the failures they had, but because of the chances they never took, the business they never started, the relationship they were too afraid to pursue, the dream they kept putting off until someday. That's the personal cost of letting your mind run wild with fear and doubt. Think about your own life right now. How much energy do you waste every day wrestling with unnecessary worry? How many hours do you spend replaying past mistakes or imagining future disasters? That mental energy isn't free. You're paying for it with your time, your health, your happiness. I remember working with a sales professional, brilliant at his job when he was focused, but his uncontrolled mind would kick in during every client meeting. Instead of listening to the client, he was listening to the voice in his head, second guessing every word he said. They probably think I'm too pushy. I should have said that differently. They're going to say no. His sales numbers weren't just statistics on a page. They were the direct cost of his mental chaos. The professional impact is just as real. Every time your mind drifts during an important meeting, every time you hold back your ideas because of self-doubt, every time you procrastinate on a crucial project, you're paying with your career growth, your income potential, your professional reputation. But perhaps the highest price we pay is in our relationships. An uncontrolled mind can destroy a marriage before it even shows signs of trouble. Why? Because when your mind is constantly creating stories, assuming the worst and replaying old hurts, you're not really present with the people you love. You're not listening to what they're saying. You're listening to what your uncontrolled mind is saying about what they're saying. I've seen partnerships dissolve, not because of actual problems, but because of imagined ones. I've watched friendships fade away because someone's uncontrolled mind convinced them they weren't worthy of good relationships. I've witnessed parents miss precious moments with their children because their minds were too busy worrying about the future to enjoy the present. The truth is, an uncontrolled mind is like a credit card with a sky-high interest rate. Every negative thought, every moment of unchecked anxiety, every self-sabotaging behavior compounds over time. You pay for it in missed opportunities, strained relationships, and unfulfilled potential. Most people never connect their results to their thinking. They blame their circumstances, their background, their luck. They spend years, decades even, looking for answers outside themselves, while the real solution lies within their own minds. The price isn't just what you lose, it's who you become. When you let your mind run unchecked, you gradually become a smaller version of yourself. You start accepting limitations as facts. You begin to identify with your fears instead of your potential. But right now, in this moment, you have a choice. You can continue paying this price, or you can decide that enough is enough. Because while the cost of an uncontrolled mind is enormous, the reward of taking control is even greater. Now, this is where everything changes. This is where you move from understanding the problem to creating the solution. Taking control of your mind isn't just another self-improvement technique. It's the foundation of every success you'll ever create. I discovered this truth the hard way. Sitting in that car with an empty gas tank, I made a decision that would transform my entire life. I decided that from that moment forward, I would guard my mind like a fortress. I would become as selective about my thoughts as I was about the food I ate or the company I kept. The first step in taking control is understanding this fundamental truth. You are not your thoughts. You are the observer of your thoughts. This distinction changes everything. When a negative thought appears, you don't have to accept it. You can observe it, challenge it, and replace it with something that serves you better. Let me give you a practical technique I use every single day. I call it the Stop, Challenge, Choose method. When you catch your mind spinning negative scenarios or limiting beliefs, say stop out loud if you can, or firmly in your mind if you're in public. This pattern interrupt is crucial. It's like hitting the pause button on a runaway train. Then challenge that thought. Is it true? Can you absolutely know it's true? What evidence do you have? Most negative thoughts crumble under real scrutiny. Finally, choose a new thought that moves you toward your goals instead of away from them. I worked with a real estate agent who was terrified of cold calling. Every time she picked up the phone, her mind would flood with thoughts of rejection. We applied this technique. When those thoughts came, she'd say stop, challenge the assumption that people would reject her, and choose to focus on how she was offering valuable solutions to potential clients. Within 60 days, her call reluctance was gone and her commission income doubled. This isn't about positive thinking, it's about accurate thinking. It's about training your mind to see reality clearly instead of through the distorted lens of fear and past conditioning. Creating new neural pathways requires repetition and emotional intensity. Your old thought patterns are like deep rivers carved into the landscape of your mind. You can't just wish them away. You need to consciously create new channels for your thoughts to flow through. A daily practice that will revolutionize your thinking. Start each morning with what I call mental programming time. Before you look at your phone, before you check your email, take 15 minutes to consciously direct your mind. Write down your goals in the present tense, as if they're already achieved. Visualize yourself performing at your best. Feel the emotions of success. One of my clients, a surgeon, used this technique to overcome performance anxiety. Every morning, she would vividly imagine herself performing procedures with absolute precision and calm confidence. Within weeks, her actual performance in the operating room transformed. Her mind couldn't tell the difference between the vivid mental rehearsal and reality. Another powerful practice is what I call thought auditing. 3 times each day, morning, noon, and night, take 30 seconds to audit your mental state. What are you focusing on? What stories are you telling yourself? Are these thoughts moving you towards success or away from it? This awareness alone will begin to shift your mental patterns. Remember, your mind is like a muscle. It grows stronger with proper training. Just as you wouldn't expect to get in physical shape without consistent exercise, you can't expect to develop mental discipline without daily practice. A challenge for you. For the next 7 days, commit to catching every negative thought and immediately replacing it with its positive opposite. When your mind says, I can't afford it, replace it with, how can I afford it? When it says, this is too hard, replace it with, I'm figuring this out step by step. One of the most powerful techniques for mental mastery is what I call future self-conversations. Take 5 minutes each evening to talk with your future self, the person you're becoming. Ask them what decisions they're glad you made today. Let them guide you toward the actions that will create the future you desire. The key to all these practices is consistency. Your uncontrolled mind has been running its programs for years, maybe decades. Taking control requires patience and persistence. But here's the beautiful part. Every time you catch a negative thought and replace it, every time you direct your mind towards success instead of failure, you're building new neural pathways. You're literally rewiring your brain for success. I've seen people transform their lives in as little as 30 days using these techniques, not because the techniques are magical, but because they finally understood that taking control of their mind wasn't optional. It was essential. By the end of today, you'll have thought thousands of thoughts. Each one is either strengthening your old patterns or creating new ones. Each one is either building your future or reinforcing your limitations. The choice, starting right now, is yours. The path to mental mastery is like climbing a mountain. Every step builds upon the last, and the view from the top transforms everything. This isn't just about positive thinking. This is about rewiring your entire mental operating system for extraordinary achievement. I want you to think about the most successful day you've ever had. A day when everything clicked, when you were in complete flow, when your mind was working for you instead of against you. That state wasn't an accident. It was the result of your mind being perfectly aligned with your goals. That's what mental mastery looks like, and you can create it on demand. Let me share something powerful about goal setting that changed my life. Most people set goals the way they make wishes, vague, emotional, and without real commitment. But your mind doesn't respond to wishes. It responds to clear, specific commands backed by emotional energy. When I work with top performers, we use what I call the 3 dimensions of goal setting. First, you write your goals with such crystal clarity that a complete stranger could understand exactly what you're going to achieve. Second, you attach deadlines that stretch you, but don't break you. And this is crucial. You connect each goal to your core values and deepest motivations. I remember working with a surgeon who wanted to reduce his operating times without sacrificing quality. Writing performed surgeries faster wasn't enough. We got specific. Reduce average procedure time by 20% while maintaining a 100% safety record by implementing new protocols and practicing visualization daily. His mind now had a clear target to work toward. But here's where visualization becomes absolutely critical. Your mind processes vivid mental images as if they're real experiences. When you visualize with intensity, your brain creates the same neural patterns as when you're actually performing the action. This isn't fantasy. It's mental rehearsal, and it's powerful. Here's the visualization technique I teach to Olympic athletes and business leaders alike. Spend 10 minutes each morning in what I call success rehearsal. See yourself performing at your absolute best. Feel the emotions, hear the sounds. Make it so real that your palms sweat. Your subconscious mind will begin accepting this as your new normal. A CEO I worked with used this technique before every major presentation. She would visualize not just the presentation, but the preparation, the confident walk to the podium, the engaged audience, the successful conclusion. Within 6 months, she became known as one of the most compelling speakers in her industry. But visualization without emotional regulation is like having a high-performance car with no brakes. You must learn to master your emotional state. Your emotions are the fuel that powers your mental engine. When they're out of control, they hijack your thinking. When they're mastered, they become a source of unstoppable energy. A technique I call emotional anchoring. Think of a time when you were at your absolute best, confident, focused, unstoppable. Fully relive that moment. As you feel those peak emotions create a physical trigger, perhaps touching your thumb and forefinger together. Do this repeatedly, and you'll build a neural link between the trigger and the peak state. Soon you can access that state whenever you need it. One of my clients, a professional negotiator, used this technique to stay calm and focused during high-stakes deals. No matter how tense the situation, she could trigger her peak state in seconds. Her closing rate increased by 40% in just 3 months. The path to mental mastery also requires what I call strategic incompetence. You must decide what you're not going to focus on. Your mind has limited bandwidth. Champions become champions by directing their mental energy toward what matters most and ruthlessly eliminate mental clutter. Every time you worry about things you can't control, every time you scatter your mental focus across too many projects, every time you let your mind drift to unproductive thoughts, you're diluting your mental power. Mental mastery means choosing your thoughts as carefully as a sniper chooses their targets. I want you to try something right now. Close your eyes for a moment. Picture your biggest goal with absolute clarity. See it, feel it, make it real in your mind. Now notice how your body responds to that vision. That's your mind and body aligning with success. That's what becomes possible when you achieve mental mastery. Remember, the path to mental mastery isn't about perfection. It's about progression. Every time you catch a wandering thought and bring it back to your goals, every time you choose empowering emotions over limiting ones, every time you visualize your success with crystal clarity, you're strengthening your mental muscles